second big transition for us, Joe, was that knock on the door when the founder of this organization comes in, hadn't even been on our radar screen, not at all, and says, "We believe you are the person to take over the organization and to run this." Hadn't even dreamt of it at all, but knew that night, yes, we will do this. So I guess the lesson there is sometimes something presents itself, and again, that great adventure of life, you just got to grab a hold of it.
Yeah.
It's there. It's not there forever. It's there for a moment of time. And with all the wisdom that you can muster, you make a decision, you grab a hold of it, and you go with it. And looking back on that, would we do it again? We'd do the very same thing all over again.
Welcome to Titans of Transition, featuring real-life stories, anecdotes, and inspiration about pivotal career moments from leaders who have been there. Join host Joe Miller, former scientist and senior technology leader turned executive coach, as he unpacks transitional moments to help inspire change.
Gary Wood, welcome to Titans of Transition podcast. I'm so happy you're here today, and everyone listening in, I just want to let you know that Gary is a very special man to me. Early in the year 2002, I found Gary online because I had gone to a new industry and I was having some challenges being successful, and others that I knew had been using coaches, and I decided I needed to engage a coach. Gary, you were so helpful to me back then. Through your coaching, it really helped me make some great decisions and move forward in a positive way. But it also gave me an interest in looking into coaching myself. So Gary, welcome again. Why don't you let folks know where have you been residing?
Yeah, we're about a couple of hours north of Toronto in Ontario, Canada. Yeah, and we've been here for quite a number of years. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm so excited that you agreed to come on the podcast, not just because of this connection and how you've helped me in the past, but also I think you have some interesting transition stories. And before we get totally into that, I just want to let everyone know that we have a little bit deeper connection because we have shared faith. And that, I think, helped us since our worldviews were so tightly aligned. It was a deeper engagement, at least for me. And that's one of the reasons why I sought you out, having that shared worldview, that shared faith. So that was great. But let's talk a little bit about your career professionally and what you're doing today and how we got there. And there's a couple transition stories you might want to lay out for folks.
Wow, how long do you have? Where do you want?
We like to keep these under an hour if we can. So
where would you like to start? Actually, moving into coaching, which will be coming up on 23 years now, and just thinking of transitions, coaching just didn't arrive overnight, right? It was the result of probably a lot of things that went on before I even knew coaching as a profession.
Well, okay, maybe touch on that a little bit, because I think that's extremely relevant.
Yeah. So my background really had me working with literally thousands of people every year. We were involved with a Christian camp. Big transition for us, giving up our careers back at the time and moving up to the area that we currently live in to work behind the scenes at a camp and to plant a church as well. But that time at that camp, and after 15 years behind the scenes, then we transitioned, and I took over the leadership of that camping organization. And then as full-time, that ended up being working with so many people, young men and women, adults, couples, that sort of thing. So that gets me then into the question that you asked, which is, when we finished that work, when we passed that work on to two younger couples, and I was asking myself, what do I do next? had that foundation on caring about people. It had that foundation of realizing that, wow, maybe I could make a difference in people's lives. And it was right at that time. A little interesting little circumstance took place. And I happened to be sitting reading in a book. I thought I was going to, would be like your Barnes and Noble. Up here it's chapters. And I thought I was going to go into doing public seminars and that sort of thing, and training. And I saw this one little paragraph, Joe, just one paragraph about this new profession called coaching. And it was new.
Yes, it's not been around that long. It was very new back then. Yeah.
And that captured my imagination. And sitting there, I thought, yep, that's it. I want to look into this. And that's what then transitioned me into coaching. That's
Interesting. I'm curious about that a little bit, because coming from the background you've come from, did you consider counseling? Because a lot of times people who might be in that faith walk, that faith background, want to engage with people. That's a bit typical path as well. It's not coaching, obviously.
I did not.
Okay, I'm just curious.
Oh no, and it seemed to me, and again, I don't want to put my foot in my mouth or something, but it just seemed to me that the coaching was much more in line with that kind of forward focused personal and professional development angle that my head was in. So
you engaged with some kind of a certification organization, or what happened next?
Well, there was only one organization that did exist back then, Coach University.
Mm-hmm.
So I signed up for Coach University, and very shortly after they began Corporate Coach University, using all of us who were present as the guinea pigs and as the ones who were developing their program. So
I think they call that founding members.
Right, yeah. And so Coach University and Corporate Coach University, that's what I graduated from, yeah.
And, I engaged you over the phone, right? I mean, even back then there wasn't engaging with Zoom or anything like that. That didn't really, there were platforms like that, but that we take for granted today with this call, how easy it is. But back then, those were just reserved for the corporate office with very high end $100,000 plus pieces of equipment and those sorts of things. So a lot of the coaching was remote on the phone, unless of course you were doing it in your local town or city. Then you might travel and meet face to face.
Your real tools, unless it did happen to be personal, as you're saying, in person, the real tools. I mean, you had a website, and we're talking back in 1998. So
yeah,
one of those ancient kind of websites, and for at least for the solo entrepreneur, and the phone. Yeah, that was it.
Yeah. And maybe just, if you don't mind, just taking a little bit of time in because I think this comes up a lot for me, is differentiating between mentoring and coaching. I know that I often, when people reach out to me, there's some confusion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I would say mentoring, my simple take on it, really, Joe. Mentoring, I have something that I'm going to pass on to you. My experience will be beneficial to you, where I might be able to say, try this, do it this way, make sure you avoid that. And in the real world, there is an element of that. I'm starting to get to the point where most leaders are starting to look younger than myself.
Yeah.
So from time to time, you have some wisdom that you hopefully might be able to impart. But by and large, mentoring is again more telling.
Mm-hmm.
Mentoring is passing on of experience, whereas coaching is drawing from the individual themselves. It's building on what they already know. It's helping them add what they might need to know, and it's moving forward from there. There may be bits and pieces in the conversation where you're, able to be of help with some experience that you've had. That's the difference.
That's great. I mean, I often engage with people in the technology space because of my background. And people who've led IT, which was my area, they tend to be a little bit more pragmatic.
Mm-hmm.
And their thought is, I need to know this information, this domain information, and apply it. I just don't have enough information in order to be successful.
More information.
And that's really fits more, I think, of a mentoring situation where you're looking for specific information, advice within a domain,
Mm-hmm.
but then you're softer in terms of challenging the individual. It's kind of a friendly conversation over lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And how did you address this kind of thing and that sort of conversation versus with me, coaching is just as you said, it's more non-directive and it's more dealing with what's inside, what kind of obstacles in our mindsets or work do we need to do to understand our strengths and our natural wiring, and how do we turn those things into positives in the workplace or in life. And
Life,
so
leadership.
whatever it would be. But anyway, I thought that might be a helpful thing to discuss.
Well, just
let's talk.
To
Go ahead.
that point, I would say this, that I have the wonderful privilege of working with some really smart cookies like yourself. And in some ways, what do I know about what it is they do? Maybe I have a general knowledge, but some physicist who's working with a bump on an atom or something, what do I know about that? But they're not engaging me to know what they know. They're engaging me to know people. They're engaging me to know how to get the best out of them and to do those things that you just mentioned. So do I have to be an expert in all areas? And I work probably across all sectors. I don't have to be an expert, but I need to know people.
Yeah, that's great. There was actually an exercise I got certified from the John Maxwell team in my coaching, as well as another organization before that. At coach training, they actually used a juggling exercise. I don't know if you've heard of this or not before, Gary, where it's kind of the triad idea where you put people in a group and a non-juggler would coach another person on how to juggle. It was very interesting. Make observations. And so that drew a really stark line, I believe, in terms of the difference between mentoring and coaching.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting way of exploring that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder, why don't we talk a little bit about, and you touched on this before, this transition you made from essentially leading this organization and then handing it off to a younger couple.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more about that process and maybe what came after that.
Yeah. We loved what we did. I loved what I did. I got to work with a lot of really great people. Had about 40 leaders that I was working with very intimately. I mean, just a wonderful, wonderful atmosphere, Joe, and good things were happening. We're making a difference in lives. Having said that, we worked with a lot of young men and women who came and worked alongside with us. I always looked at them as working this way versus looking down on them. And we became convinced that we were sitting on a gold mine of young men and women. And that there were things that we could do that they couldn't do. But there were also things that we were currently doing that they actually could do. And if we stepped aside, if we moved sideways and gave them some room, they could actually step into their purpose, the things that were really important for them to carry out. So it was a hard decision. It really was, because we had lots of energy. I had lots of vision. I mean, it was all still firing there, but just this sense that they need a place. And if we give them a place, that's just bringing good people forward, and we'll go on and do something else. I didn't know what the something else was at the time, of course, but I took the leap and here I am.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I really can resonate with that a lot, because I think ultimately in what you were doing was leadership, right? So ultimately what you're trying to do is developing leaders
Yeah.
around you. I think that's part of being really successful as a leader, is recognizing, as you said, there's things that they could do, recognizing people who work under you and what their talents are, and trying to invest in them for the future benefit of the organization. Because you're not going to be there forever. We would all love to continue forever, but as you said, it doesn't make room for them, and it doesn't allow them the developmental opportunities either. So I think sometimes the old authoritarian model can really get in the way for overall success for an organization, because it's so controlled by who's currently in that top seat, if you will.
And really, we don't pay attention to if the organization could speak, if the ministry could speak, if the whatever it is could speak. What kind of leadership would it be asking for?
Yeah.
And was I capable of providing that well on into the future? Yes, I believe I could have. Having said that, you look back and you see the wisdom, because there were so many things coming down the pike in terms of new regulations and cultural changes and all that sort of thing, that there was great benefit then in having, you'll know what I mean, and having younger leadership come along. Yes, there may be some wisdom that they needed to learn, but there was real benefit for the time in having those people in place.
Yeah, no, it's good. So what happened?
Don't know when to step aside. Right, that's the challenge today. There was no one pushing me out. There was no one saying this is the deadline. I'd probably be there today if I still wished to be, but yeah.
So on that point then, how did you sense that it was time to do that? To step aside?
Yeah, I think there were a confluence of things coming together. The simple answer that I mentioned before is we just became very conscious that there was this group of young men and women, that gold mine that we referred to, and they were just looking for a spot to serve. Where could they serve? And we could actually provide a spot. So that's one element. But in our personal lives as well, our own children, they were growing up as well. They were entering a new phase. And the work that we were in camping work, required like 24/7. Really, it was all consuming. And that's okay when your kids are at a certain age, they're with you, they're in on it, they're a part of it. But then they get older as well, and their needs change. And we realized they were important as well. Not only the several thousand, others that we served every year, but they and our family were important. And they became a factor in that as well, that fed into this also. So,
yeah, of course. Yeah. Boy, yeah, we don't want to just imply that everything is all about our careers.
Yeah.
This kind of prompted in my mind to ask you about, I don't know if this is the right time or not, but ask you about your process. You worked with me, and I know you've continued to develop this process of the clarity model, and I think how that works together with the whole emphasis you've had on burnout and balance and those things. In a way, that kind of tied in, because I think, we look holistically at our entire lives, and how are these things congruent? These decisions are part of our overall fabric of or context.
Yeah. They're all a piece of it. Across all of my coaching career, I've dealt with overload and burnout. I don't mean I've had overload and burnout, but that's what I've dealt with, right? Intensity, overload, and burnout amongst leaders, executives, and professionals. And to make that connection back again, Joe, when I was in that camping organization, I sometimes say I spent 10 years running in the red. Everything was going so great. I mean, really good things were happening. But when I look back on it, if I would have spent time, oftentimes chatting with you, perhaps, back then, I might have been chatting with you as best I could in the present, but I was actually 6 months off in the future. Because my head was in I needed to be ahead of the game, in the work that we were doing. So I was always planning for something. And and that was very demanding. And getting phone calls of some kid at 11:30 at night decide that'd be a good time to have a chat with you. And those sorts of things, it just became very wearing. And I found myself, that's why I say, running in the red. I never would say that I experienced burnout, but I would say I experienced overload. And it came to a culmination. A couple of things happened. It came to a culmination. I was in a wholesaler picking up supplies one day, and I began having panic attacks. Never ever had such a thing before. And I thought that huge building was just crowding in. I had to get out and phoned back to camp and said, I think I have to head for a hospital. I thought I was having a heart attack.
Wow.
But being a man,
yeah,
I drove right past the hospital.
Yeah.
And you get that story.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But by the time got near our town where the turnoff was, I knew I have to get to a hospital. And that time I did drive to the hospital. Kind of scared the daylights out of Alice, my wife, and whatnot. But there were a number of other little signs in there. And I mentioned this, kind of coming back to clarity and momentum. It was at that time when I got that wake-up call. And I'll mention one other thing. This is just very, if I can, just very...
Yeah, of course.
This is very intimate, but I think it's of help. I have a wonderful relationship with Alice, my wife. We always have. It has been just wonderful, really. And we were out on a rare little walk one time during that 10 years, and she said to me, "We don't have much romance anymore, do we?"
Ooh.
And that just went like a sword right through my heart. Really, that was a killer, that. And that was part of that kind of that wake-up call along with the panic attacks. And it was then that I began thinking, I need some help in managing this organization and leading this organization. Though I'm the answer to everything in this organization. When you work in a small Christian nonprofit, you wear every hat. And I cannot be the answer to everything any longer. And that's where I happened to start working on what now became the clarity model. That is there some help for me? Is there some help in the Bible to help me better manage this organization, better manage my leadership of it, day in, day out, in a way that I'm not going to experience burnout. Otherwise, I'm cooked.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And
that's where the rudimentary form of the clarity model began to develop right there. Then, when we finished that, I began working with leaders and executives around it. That became a framework to help them in a two-pronged thing. Number one, deal with the actual burnout, deal with what's actually taking place. But number two, give them that tool as well. Give them some tools to better navigate their experience of leadership. And so that's the genesis of it, Joe.
You used the word momentum as you introduced this last section here. What do you mean by that context to the clarity model?
Yeah. Clarity and momentum.
Momentum.
We refer to it now, right? Well, I think it's something all of us want, right? We put in place, we try make great plans, and we try have all of our ducks in a row, and then it comes down to execution, right? And it's often in the execution, it's in the momentum, it's in the following through and making sure if this truly matters to us, that we actually achieve it. That's the idea of momentum. Hit the start button, keep going until we achieve whatever it is that we're attempting to achieve.
That's fascinating because I just had a discussion with one of my friends this week, actually, about how a lot of the studies we engage in to improve ourselves, Bible studies or professional development studies, they focus on the why and the what, but not so much the
Yeah.
how to execute, or how, and to use your terminology,
Yeah.
how to ensure we have momentum to propel us forward to
Mm.
realize those intentions that we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I love that momentum.
Yeah. And somehow I think, Joe, it's, we think that the goal is sufficient enough to pull us forward.
Nope.
But it just doesn't do it. It's
No.
that everyday, day in, day out, the step by step things that will move us toward that goal. And better that instead of, and again, you'll know what I mean, instead of just touting the goal and
Yeah.
hoping that's going to be sufficient to pull me forward, much better to be practical and say step one, step two, step three, and just keep executing on those.
I wonder, I'm going to drop something in. You had what was it? The 50, the book you wrote, the 52
52
weeks
solutions for
solutions.
those who need a 25-hour day.
There you go.
Yeah.
Was that intended as practical tactics or encouragement?
Yeah, and that's precisely what it is. And really, moving forward successfully, and you can pull me up short on this if I'm going astray, but really moving forward successfully, Joe, is really a series of simple things. They're not hard things. And we can save so much time, or we can, maximize our time. We can be more effective by just paying attention to the basics. And really, that's what that book is. It's just 52 simple things that an individual can do with some coaching, some self-coaching that goes along with each one of those, that a person can do to be able to be more effective, more efficient in their day. So that came right out of that same experience, right? And then it was useful. I never wrote it down until I was a coach. And then I went to Starbucks, as a matter of fact. And
We're all great ideas are birthed.
yeah, and I pretty much wrote the whole thing, the rough of it, in one day.
Wow.
I just sat down early in the morning and just kept going. It just all spilled out of me. But again, these transitions, right? It tied back to something that had happened previously, and now it just needed to be brought out and set to paper, if you will.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. So, okay, so we've sort of gone off a little bit. You have this transition, you hand stuff off. At some point you became a coach, right?
Yeah.
You've been doing that for 20 years. Is that what you said? Something like that?
Yeah, I guess April.
23?
April will be coming up 23 years.
23. Yeah. So what are you currently engaged in? Has there been a recent transition, or have you just stayed in what you've been doing for quite a while? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I would say in terms of myself, in terms of transition, I have stayed in the same lane throughout my coaching, which has been dealing with overload and burnout. There are those few times where I joke, I say, well, Joe, I kind of got burned out on burnout, and
Irony.
I kind of stopped emphasizing it for a while. And then you get a new head of steam and away you go again. So that and the clarity model, now the clarity and momentum thinking framework, has occupied of late a whole lot more time as well. So there are really those two things that are going on. And I would say a recent transition is saying, okay, could I take clarity and momentum training and turn that into online self-paced courses? In other words, could a whole lot more people benefit from it if I harness this in a little different way versus saying, we're going to run a course on this day at this hour, and if you can show up.
Right. And I think a lot of times what's really helpful for people, and I'm entertaining this idea too, is having a course be in the middle. So you have resources like these podcasts, then you have people signing up for these self-paced courses in different areas. And then if they need more help, they can always reach out and engage a coach to take them
Yeah.
through more specific, personalized
Yeah.
engagements.
Yeah, and I make a difference. We were talking about mentoring and coaching as well. The difference between training and coaching.
Yeah.
Also, the training kind of leg of what I do is something quite specific. There's a lot more passing along of information and tools and techniques and that sort of thing. And then the application of that, again, others who might wish to apply that even further then might engage something like coaching.
Right.
Right?
I'm just wondering at this current time, and I think there's been a steady increased pressure on people at work. Certain jobs like the one you had, had to be available 24/7. Doctors, there's various professions that have that kind of setup, if you will, for burnout and overload. But this last year with the pandemic and everyone having to be separated from all of their relationships, their families, and shelter in place, and very interesting, the trend in telecommuting and remote work. People have lost their boundaries. I hear you hear a lot about Zoom fatigue, right?
Zoom fatigue, yeah.
People can't get away from it. So even in jobs that tended to be more bound, 9 to 5, or I'm not on premise, so I'm off work. Now that's blurring even more. So I'm just wondering, has there been an uptick in demand for what you do, or has there been some kind of additional challenges that you see people dealing with?
The biggest challenge for me, Joe, is actually restraint, because, and I don't want to sound diminishing in any way, because burnout has become a popular term. Everybody's burned out now, and I don't mean to diminish that in any way. It is akin to what you're saying. I think fatigue. A great fatigue has set in, a tiredness. But I wish to work with that subset of all of those people for whom they are at a critical juncture. It brings them to a critical juncture in their life, their work, their leadership, and something needs to be paid attention to right now. Right?
Yeah.
And hopefully kind of what I would call just this general burnout. We pray that this year we're going to see a huge change in that. And I know, because the leaders, executives that I work with, it's back-to-back Zoom calls, it's dealing with crises. They've been 1 year now, many of them dealing with crises. Healthcare executives that I work with, their people are now, they've come through it. Now they have people leaving. They have the ranks diminishing because people are fried. They're done. They want out.
Yeah. So how do people, Gary, know? I mean, is there some leading indicators or some symptoms where they cross over this? Where is this boundary between just being fatigued and burnout? Yeah. How do you know that?
Oh boy.
I know that's probably a long conversation.
And a tough one, because again, I don't want to diminish something that anyone is feeling. It's real. Right. It is palpably real to them. But certainly burnout, there are I would say four signals the person might be on the edge of burnout. So that would be a loss of physical energy, or loss of physical, emotional, spiritual energy, right? And the second would be a loss of involvement. So someone where they once were very involved, they were once out there around the water cooler, they were once out there with people, now they've withdrawn. Right? More by themselves. This is what companies have to look for as well. Managers need to be very aware of this now as well. And there's a loss of effectiveness, number 3. So really, I was on top of my game. I was really, man, I was in there, I was engaged, I was doing it. And I just don't feel I have my edge anymore.
Mm.
And then the last one, number 4, would be a loss of a sense of health and well-being, oftentimes along with overload or stress as it becomes more severe. There would be maybe physical symptoms that go along. Little things, just a whole accumulation of little things that you can't really, a doctor couldn't put their finger on.
Mm.
A rash and a cold and
Sure.
all that.
Yeah, your whole immune system gets impacted, I think.
Yeah,
And
yeah. So those would be the
yeah.
signals, I think, and yeah,
And it's like maybe I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but a subconscious protection mechanism that kicks into place where people withdraw. They're trying to protect themselves in some way, and they may not know what's going on.
yeah.
They may, and somewhere in there too is probably depression. It becomes acute.
And it certainly can. And of course, I'm not a therapist or something.
Sure.
So someone depression, that would be another professional that they might require. So that's the point. The individual that I'm looking to be able to be of service of, that I know that I can be of service, they're on that teetering edge. They know they're overloaded. They know that they have these pressures playing in upon them. And they're saying, I could really benefit from someone right now helping me deal, number 1, with what I'm experiencing, but number 2, put some new strategies and structures in place to move ahead in a much better way, personally, with my team and my whole organization.
Well, I can't think of a more relevant time right now. I don't know if relevant's the right word, but I know a lot of people, and I don't know where they fall exactly, but people feel very heavy
Yeah.
about what has been going on in their work and home life because of the extra challenges presented by the pandemic and the pivots that companies have had to make. I facilitate a group of life science CIOs, and this month our Zoom call, there's about 30 of them, of these CIOs. This month we're going to focus just specifically on return to work. And all of them had to pivot quickly to have a high percentage of their workforce be remote.
Yeah.
Some jobs just have to be manufacturing, they just have to be on site, or quality, they have to be on site. But huge swaths of their employee base have been working remote.
Mm-hmm.
And the companies are trying to figure out, as hopefully the vaccine has an impact, hopefully herd immunity kicks in, what are they going to do then? If people want to come back, is there going to be a hybrid model? And so they're trying to sort through that. And they've been very concerned, you touched on this, about their employees.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the company in general, these IT executives, but also their teams. Things have really pivoted and shifted.
Yeah.
And this has been a concern. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. And that's, again, where we're dealing with people, and there is a huge challenge coming, because some will be eager, get me back in that office, or get me back in that workplace. Others will be, oh, I don't know, I don't feel comfortable,
Right.
I don't feel. So we have this, there isn't a consistency, just for the simple fact that we have people, and that's a big challenge for the leaders of those workforces.
Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty. And we talk about the science and making wise decisions based upon the science, but science is not a static thing. I mean, we're evolving in our understanding. And so there are people in the middle of this, and you're absolutely right. It's not a clear-cut kind of thing, which puts a lot of pressure on the leaders.
I think we've been a year as well. We're now a year in.
Yeah.
Couple of days here, I'm looking at my calendar now, couple days here, we shut down. Just a few more days from now. And there's been a lot of talk about VUCA, right? That acronym: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity.
Mm-hmm.
And for some time since I first heard that, I've always felt there was a missing term, and that's a D at the end of it, and it's disconnectedness. Mm-hmm. So increasingly, people are feeling disconnected from other people. This already was underway before a pandemic hit. So you add 1 year of isolation or a whole new form of disconnectedness to your personal psyche, repertoire, and whatnot. It makes it that much more, well, I don't know what it makes it. What does that mean for people coming back together a year from now? Some will be fine, say, wow, this is wonderful. Nice to see you again, Joe,
Mm.
right? In face to face. But for others, yeah, it's,
We're all different.
yeah,
We're all made differently. And so, how we've responded to our unique pressures in
yeah,
our own lives, it's all different. So, it's very hard to predict.
yeah. How do
And
we
being,
connect people?
yeah,
Connect people in a way that we're not forcing them to do something, but we're
yeah,
connecting them the way that it's a healthy integration back into, well, I was going to say normal, but whatever that's going to be.
yeah, exactly. Hey, Gary, let's kind of pivot now and start talking about lessons learned. I always liked at the end of these interviews to ask the question, to try to draw out, in terms of transitions, in terms of this podcast trying to be a resource and service to individuals to navigate knowing if a transition is needed,
Yeah.
to be in touch with their own personal wiring, calling, purpose, sense of purpose, what have you,
Yeah.
and how, to use your words, employ momentum
Mhm.
to be effective moving forward in stepping out into a transition, a new direction. So I'm just wondering, as you look back over your experiences and discovery and learnings, what kind of advice would you give, do you give in terms of dealing with transitions? And some of the transitions can be forced on us, and some of them, of course, chosen. So,
Mhm. And I think that's the difference.
yeah,
So I guess my first big early transition would have been us giving up our careers to move up where we were. So our peers were on a trajectory and we were going on a different trajectory at that point in time because we felt something was important. So I think the first thing would be, out of my experience, that there are times you just need to step out.
yeah,
It's stepping out into the unknown. You don't know what might happen, but the adventure of life calls you out. And
really does.
and you go for it. You go for it with gusto. And only time will tell when you look back. And we look back on that and say that we would do exactly the same thing all over again. It had its challenges, but it was worth it. So that was very intentional, I would say. And you just go for it. And the second big transition for us, Joe, was that knock on the door when the founder of this organization comes in. We hadn't even been on our radar screen, not at all, and says, we believe you are the person to take over the organization and to run this. Hadn't even dreamt of it at all. But knew that night, yes, that we will do this. So I guess the lesson there is sometimes something presents itself. And again, that great adventure of life, you just got to grab a hold of it.
Yeah.
It's there. It's not there forever. It's there for a moment of time. And with all the wisdom that you can muster, you make a decision, you grab a hold of it, and you go with it. And looking back on that, would we do it again? We'd do the very same thing
Yeah.
all over again. And then I think the third transition for us, which would have been that example we're talking about of recognizing there were these young men and women, and then transitioning out of that organization, finding myself moving into this new profession called coaching. Maybe there, it's that sometime there is a more, I don't want to say thoughtful, there's maybe a longer process that's taking place. All of that probably took place over a year and a half, right? Where you're
Yeah.
kind of thinking about it, you're weighing the options, whatever it might be, and then you reach a decision that actually is going to impact the rest of your life and impact a lot of other lives as well. And again, well, in that great adventure of life, you follow through with it.
Yeah.
And
I mean, at a certain point, you have to step out into the unknown.
yeah,
There is a process there, though. I really resonate with this. There is a process where you have to evaluate what's in front of you, whether that is a realization that there's something pulling you forward, the coaching framework of, are you moving towards something? Or are you moving away from something? So there's this process where maybe it's more subtle, where your heart is pulling you forward, or you're seeing a need. You're testing that. You're reading scripture. You're talking to loved ones about possibilities. And that can take a very long time.
Yeah.
Or there's this other scenario like you. It may present itself where someone comes to you with a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Take this up. I believe this is for you. But in both of those, in my experience, there has to be a sense of, what am I all about? I have to understand, what are my gifts? What is God, or what has been given to me that I need to bring into this world? And is this congruent with either my innate sense of pull,
Yeah.
or this challenge that's presented in front of me?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, to that, I would respond that if what I'm looking to do, if what is presented to me isn't in line with who I am, right? My values, my preferences, my beliefs, then I'm going to be out of sync going down that path. If it is in alignment, then we're in sync, right? And we just say, yes, I'm exactly where I need to be. And then it becomes just a happy, it doesn't mean easy, but it becomes a happy journey.
Yeah. Now, I would say we would be a little bit remiss if we didn't talk about the situation where a change has been thrust on an individual, especially in this light of this last year, where there's been layoffs, there's been, companies and whole industries have been decimated, where people have found themselves essentially on the street wondering what's next. And sometimes your desires for what you want to do need to take a back stage to what you have to do in order to provide for your family or for yourself. It's okay at times to say, I'm not suggesting you do anything unethical, but it's okay at times to say, well, this isn't really what I see as on my path ultimately and what I want to do, but I need to do this for now. And to be kind to ourselves, to be gracious to ourselves, to say, this is okay for now.
Yeah.
With that scenario, where all of a sudden something externally which you cannot control has happened.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll sound a little harsh. I don't know.
Go ahead.
Cut me off. It's all well and good, in one sense, saying, I'm only going to do this kind of work and that's all it is. But reality dictates you may need to put bread on the table. And you and I and everyone else, we need to be willing sometimes just to be flexible and say, yeah, this may be a temporary detour on the road. We'll get back on somewhere down the road, but for now, this is what we need to do. And it comes under that category. You just got to do what you got to do. Why? Well, because for the welfare of your family, or you just need to do it.
Yeah,
it's in those tough detours that we learn a lot about ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe the most. It's in tough stuff where we really learn about ourselves. And we perhaps even find new paths that sometimes might even be better than the original path. I don't want
that really
to
speaks.
It's tough. I'm not taking away from that.
It really speaks to me, because that's been my journey. I think that I started in one career as a scientist, and then after 8 or 9 years, I moved to another career heading up IT, getting into IT through automation of laboratories. And I was on that run in IT leadership for a long time. And it was lucrative. And I had the need to put food on the table, but I had the need to put my kids through college, cash flow some things, right? but I had a sense that developed over years and years that I really wasn't completely fulfilled with that.
Yeah.
And that's why, I mean, what I did was the coaching thing on the side for a while. And I think that it was a longer journey. So sometimes these things, these transitions are sharp spikes or big inflection points, and sometimes they're sort of gradual and a little bit more calculated. I think in hindsight for me, I should have moved into what I'm currently doing now sooner, but that's okay. There was a period when I was very cognitive that I was kind of done with it. Some of the people that worked with me probably would agree with that. He's been done for a while. But anyway, I think that those are great lessons. I don't know if you have any closing thoughts, Gary.
Well, it would just be this, and I use this in the clarity and momentum thinking as well. The outcomes are really important, but outcomes are about two things. So we might have a very objective outcome, right? And we need to pay attention to that. That might be the work that you were doing. Paying attention to that outcome, being the best that you can at achieving those things for the company that you worked for. But outcomes also is about satisfying an internal compass. And many times we work to the benefit of one, working on some external objective, but we don't feed what is important to the internal compass. And that's why perhaps for years you maybe think, there's just something more. There's something not satisfying me here.
Right.
I'm doing great here, but is that all there is? And you have to take care of the internal compass. Then when you got those two in line, you say, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that I referred to this before as this friction. Over time it can become more and more pronounced.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so that's how I think you sense it reaches a culmination where you say, okay, I need to pay attention to something here and explore this. And I think that's where it really helps to get engaged with someone else, to walk side to side with you on that. And coaching is great for that.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
Gary, how can people reach you if they're interested in engaging with you or learning more about what you do? Mm-hmm. And by the way, I will put stuff in the show notes. I will put references and links in the show notes, but just from your own mouth and heart.
Yeah, well, best way is head to my website, GEWOOD.com.
Great.
And you can contact me there and you can check me out.
And I know that this has been great, Gary. And I know that we could talk for hours more.
Yeah.
But all the good things have to come to a close. And I do encourage folks to reach out to Gary. Couldn't endorse him any higher for what he's done for me in my life and career. So please do avail yourself of Gary if you have the need. And Gary, once again, thank you for being on Titans of Transition podcast.
Hey, Joe, it's been fun.
It certainly has.
Thank you, Joe.
Hey, thanks for joining me today on Titans of Transition. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please check the show notes for additional information. Also, please like and subscribe to this channel.